Hi, everybody. How are you guys? Nice to see you. Hi, Jody and Rachel. Good to see you guys. How is the week going? I know that it's been an interesting week. I know, different places are sort of locked down and there's a lot going on. So what I've been doing recently, which I'm going to continue to do, is take some time at the beginning of every webinar, and we can always make the webinars last a little bit longer, and just go through any fears or any type of coronavirus questions or fears you have that are coming up. And if we want to just touch base on some of that and, hold space for the different things that are happening, what I'm going to do right now, and I'm going to be creating a video series about this, is I'm going to go into just some of the different challenges that present for each of the different attachment styles and some things you can do with or about this. So I know that this is a funny time, but it's a really good time to sort of answer your questions, do some of the work, and dive into a lot of this stuff. So thanks for being here, you guys. Hi, Paul, and hi, Jamie. And Shannon, hi Shannon. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by just going through so the format for today we'll start by going through some of the different challenges that come up for different attachment styles and what you can do about this. And no, I'm going to answer Jody's question as well. And then we're going to go into some of the questions that were posted in the webinar forum, like we usually do online ahead of time. And then we will dive into some different parts of the content for today, and then the open sort of Q&A for the webinar today as well. Okay, so first and foremost, I'll actually answer Jody's question. So Jody says, hi, Thais. In the YouTube video, are they dismissive, avoidant, or just not that into you? You had alluded to that there is a way of knowing if the dismissive avoidant will commit. How will you be able to tell? Okay, so I would say there's a couple core things that sort of take place if somebody's with a dismissive avoidant and that person has room to commit or is interested in committing. I would say a few of the things are that even if there's a fight or a challenge, they will tend to come back around. They won't come back around and be like, oh, I want to commit and let's make it work. But they'll come back around even if they feel really hurt. That tends to be one of the first big signs. So let's say you're dating and there's some kind of conflict or pain point. Most dismissive avoidants in the dating stage of a relationship, if they see a conflict or pain point, they shut down, they walk away, they move on, they push away, these sorts of things. Your dismissive avoidant who's really invested and interested in the relationship and is really, has feelings for you, even though they won't come back and be like, oh, let's commit and make something work, they'll usually come back and show up again and try to maintain and pursue and grow the connection. So that's a really big piece. They might do this by indirectly reaching out, sending you, you haven't talked in a couple days or something like that, and they send you a picture of something that's funny, or they'll do things that are very indirect and not very vulnerable, but they will tend to sort of show up in that way. Dismissive avoidance too in the dating stage of a relationship, it depends what stage we're talking about because it presents differently, depending on what stage you're actually in. Dismissive avoidance, for example, in the power struggle, let's say, to hold that next to the dating phase, will be likely to if there's a challenge or a fight, and if both of you are questioning the relationship, or one of you is questioning the relationship, and if you try to leave, or you mention, oh, do you want the relationship to end, or do you want me to leave, they'll say no. That's very common. Even if they're giving you all these other signals, they don't want you to, or they do want you to leave, or they're doing all these things, usually if they still are interested in the commitment in the power struggle stage, they'll literally say, I don't want you to leave. They won't say, I want you to stay. But if you ask them, do you want me to leave? They'll say no. So there's different sort of nuances to this. But what you'll see generally is that because dismissive avoidance, when they're not interested, they will not stick around. They have a very hard time sticking around in ways when they're not interested. So you'll get really clear-cut and consistent signs that they're not interested. They might avoid conflict, but you'll get consistent, clear-cut signs with no competing signals or no sort of discrepancies in the signals that they want you to leave if they don't want to be in the relationship. And oftentimes a dismissive avoidant will just leave a situation, will ghost somebody, will not get back to them, they don't really love to do the whole breakup thing. But you will consistently see that the person's bailing on plans, not spending time with you, because dismissive avoidants are pretty renowned for like not doing things they don't want to do. So you won't really see somebody like stick around just because they feel like they should or because they're afraid of hurting feelings. Like that's not just a very strong thing. Hi, Oslim. How are you? And how is your mother doing? And your family's healing? And hi, Princess Khan. Nice to see you. Hi, Jay. 2 a.m. in Lockdownsville. How is it going there? Okay, beautiful. So I'm going to dive into some of this. Hi, Ala. How are you? Okay, so I'll answer. So what I'll do right now is maybe because some of these questions are already coming up. I know there's a lot of like information already here, and a lot of people submitted questions ahead of time for the webinar. Good. I'm so happy to hear that, Oslam. So what I will do is I will go through, I'm going to answer the quick, there's not too many questions to answer in the forum today. There's just 4 quick ones. So I'm going to go through those, and then I'll start diving into some of the questions here, and we'll really just merge it right into the fearful and dismissive avoidant dynamic content for today. And then I'll hold space at the end to see if you guys want to stay for that extra time and just talk about like any coronavirus fears and attachment style triggers related. Okay. So 2 things. So number 1, MI says, hi, Thais. I am 4.5 months into dating someone, and I think we have just entered the power struggle stage. His quiz said 63% secure, 25% DA, 13% FA. Mine was 56 secure, 26 FA, 19 DA. I know you've spoken about in the past about how often fearful avoidants use sex as a way to be in connection without being vulnerable, but our situation was the opposite. We still haven't had sex. We're both very physically attracted to each other and enjoy all kinds of other acts of physical intimacy, kissing, cuddling, massages, etc. And they've even both spoken about how we're ready to sleep with each other, but the moment comes where we could and nothing happens. It's like we both avoid it. At first, I thought once I get more comfortable with him, it will happen naturally, but it's like the more feelings I develop towards him, the less likely it is for us to follow through with the sex. Like it's somehow awkward because it's been so long. Not sure how to fix this because we really do like each other, but we need the physical aspect too. We've never been like this in the past with any of our relationships, but I also know both of our previous relationships did scare us. And so there are some wounds there. Not sure how to maneuver this. Okay, so great question. So number 1, this is like less of an attachment style issue and more like a human being patterning issue that can fall outside of attachment styles. To a certain degree, there's like an attachment element because both of you have like some avoidant sides, like some fearful avoidant parts and some dismissive avoidant parts. But what can happen is like the stories we have and the fears we have around sex. Like think of this, like think of substituting instead of sex, think of substituting communication, like talking about a problem. Think about other vulnerable things in the situation. So what can happen is like if 2 people are in some kind of dynamic and there's a lot of feelings and a lot of care and a lot of investment, and then there's the fear of, you know, whatever stories you're both carrying. We could disappoint each other. We could ruin the relationship. Things are so good. It's something that changes it could ruin it. You know, I feel insecure about myself in some way. That person feels that, you know, all these different stories, those are the things that are acting as the barrier. And then because both of you have a bit of an avoidant element, there might be more of a natural tendency to sort of like avoid what makes you feel afraid and uncomfortable instead of go towards. But that's all it is. So what I would do in this case, if anybody's ever struggling with this, hi, Nof. Yeah, thanks. And so what I would do in this case, if this is any of you guys struggling with this, is take a pen and paper and write down all of the stories you're carrying around sex. So what am I making sex mean? What am I afraid could happen? Surface all of those things and then work on using the emotional processing tool to question those stories and work through them, because it's the absence of those stories that creates the freedom to do whatever you want to do in any area of your life. But it's when we're carrying those stories that we can start to feel really imprisoned by the situation. And then it becomes really complicated and sticky. So that's a great question, and I hope that helps. So the next one is, let me see. So the next one is WL. Hi, WL Hong. He says, I currently have been struggling with finding connections, both friendship and romantic, with others who I can vibe with. Love and connection is my top need, and I have set a goal as part of the self-sabotage course to have 3 individuals in my life whom I can share that deep, intimate bond with. They could be friends or a romantic partner. Good job. That's amazing. However, I am at a loss of how to do so outside of throwing what I know and seeing what sticks. All my attempts to reach out over the years, I cannot seem to find a way to connect. Even when I do connect, they fade out. I find myself being ignored when making bids for connection. It hurts so much, and it touches on core wounds of mine, that I am unworthy, unlovable, unimportant, and I just want to feel like I matter to somebody. I find myself asking, why is having consistent connection so difficult, even after I've expressed my needs and shared my wounds without criticism of the other person? How can I find my tribe? People who take moments in their day to check in, ask how I am doing, people with whom I can share a bond with, who won't judge me for my attachment needs, who are generous with their care, warmth, and attention. Is it just luck? Is it a numbers game or fate? I suffered another setback today trying to make a connection. I'm tired and feeling jaded or like giving up. I work in the arts, so I don't have an office of colleagues to interact with. I work from home, and it can feel really isolating. No one to talk to with whom I feel connected and safe in. I've gone to networking events, participated in volunteer groups, reached out in Facebook groups, including PDS, but nothing seems to have worked. Existing friends are often too busy, don't share, or aren't willing to participate in the arts, or just push away the conversation. People are shrinking in numbers to pursue different life paths. Okay, beautiful. So here's what I would say. So number one of the most common things I find people running into when they're experiencing this exact problem, and this is really common, is their expectations on how quickly a relationship forms. This is like a huge one. And this shows up in dating as well. This isn't just in friendship connections. This goes into both. And it's really not uncommon that people believe like they should reach out once and somebody should be on board right away to build a friendship or build a relationship, and it should just work out immediately. And this can be really painful and really difficult, because then we take rejection as like the end of the relationship. If somebody doesn't respond the way we expect them to, according to how we would respond to people, because we tend to project from our perception, then we take this really personally and we can get really caught up in like the pain points of it. And so what's really important to do, first and foremost, is to evaluate your expectations for how quickly something's supposed to take place. Usually, when people are like making new friends or doing different things, it takes like 3 to 4 months to nurture a relationship before there's like a common friendship where you guys have really clicked or bonded. It can be 6 months. It can be 12 months of contact. So sometimes when people are not, super open, it could be because they have a lot of burdens on their plate or a lot of other priorities or a lot of things going on. And so, or they could just have a lower personality need around friendship, right? That might not be something that's as important to them. Maybe their personality needs are more centered around romantic relationships, or maybe they're centered around, all kinds of different things. But what's really important to note is what you expect from the situation first, okay? And if you can recognize and challenge and question some of those expectations, you can start creating some transformation. And what you really want to see is you want to sort of assess, like, okay, let's say it takes 3 or 4 months of consistently chatting with somebody. And maybe you reach out the first 1 or 2 times to people, and maybe they're, not super open, but then maybe you circle back, and the next time you see somebody or the next time you connect, it sort of moves the needle a little bit each time. That's the goal in terms of building relationships. When you build new friendships or new relationships, it's really rare that somebody right away is like ready and in the same space. What's much more common is that it takes a little bit of consistency. And of course, it sounds like it can be isolating for this individual, for WL Hung, because, you're saying you work in the arts and there's less people working in the arts, and you're saying in where you're living, I think. And you're saying that there are less people who are interested in like sort of having these deeper conversations and finding your tribe. But what I would recommend is you would assess, okay, how much time am I willing to give to this? How much commitment and consistency am I willing to put into this? And maybe you give yourself a window of 6 months to like reach out to people a few times that you feel interested in. And it doesn't have to be that you reach out and say, hey, let's hang out right away every single time. You can make a few comments, and maybe it's in a Facebook group. You make a few comments to a couple people you feel like you kind of click with, and you ask how they are, and you open up and you share with your warmth, and you initiate the type of behavior you want to receive in return. And if you do this consistently in incremental chunks, eventually somebody feels this like trust, because people are strangers, right? So somebody needs to build the trust, needs to feel like there's these relatable points. And then maybe by the 5th or 6th conversation or touch base, then you say, oh, do you want to set up a Zoom call and do a workbook together? Let's say it's inside of the group, or do an exercise together, or talk about the experiences so far. Or maybe it's somebody in your community and you sort of have a few laughs with them at different events you see them at, or you touch base with them online, or you send a message here or there, or chat a little bit. But once you've warmed up that connection, that's when you'll start to find that there's people there. But one of the biggest, most common things I see with individuals when they're trying to build new relationships is that they expect that people are ready to move as quickly as they are. And that can be this huge pain point for growth. And usually it's really that consistency over time that makes a big difference. So I hope that that's helpful, because I have seen this many times, and it usually is sort of the common shared theme. And it requires consistency and patience, and basically an evaluation of what your expectations are. Because if you expect, whoops, my earring just fell out. If you expect somebody to be ready to build a friendship immediately, you're probably going to end up feeling disappointed, right? You're going to end up feeling like, oh, wow, I'm being rejected. But if you expect that it's going to take 5 or 6 months when somebody's not super warm right away, you're going to expect that that's the new normal. And your feelings or interpretations of rejection are going to shift just as a result of that adjustment in your expectations. So I hope that that's helpful. Okay, so I'm going to go through 2 other quick questions, and then we'll dive into the questions and content for today. So NM says, I'm FA, and at my DAX's request, had agreed not to reach out for a couple months while he focuses on some stressful things in his life. He had proactively written a well-worded message about why his energy needs to be focused on specific things right now, which was a new thing for him to do and be open about. He said he'd reach a well-worded message. Okay, he said he'd reach out when things settled down. At the end of that period, I thanked him for telling me and asked that he let me know whenever he's free again. It's been almost 2 months, and now with COVID-19, I assume that he'll be overloaded for a while because he works in healthcare. He lives close by, and I'm not sure what his social support looks like when he's not from here. I'm sad because I had hoped he'd reach out soon, but I worry that he interpreted our agreement as no contact until we're both very available and other commitments and won't reach out. What are your thoughts on the situation? And my ultimate question is, what's the most supportive thing I can do right now? Continue the no contact or offer support as a friend? My thought is that I can provide practical help because I'm close and won't be as overwhelmed as he will be, but I don't know how that would come off. Okay, so I think this is a great question. So here's what I would do. I think this is like a special situation where, like, especially I think when people are working in healthcare, I think there's obviously just extra stress and extra burden and worry and concern and disruption to these individuals' lifestyles. So I very much recommend, if you care about this person, just even from a friendship perspective, to reach out, but just reach out in a way that doesn't violate the agreement. So just say, hey, you might say something like, hey, I know that we talked about not reaching out, and I don't expect anything from this conversation. So you can say something like that, because usually, especially DAs, when they get more overwhelmed, they retreat more. So the more disruption, the more overwhelmment, the more they kind of retract. And to be quite honest, there's a decent chance the person doesn't respond to you at this time if they're dismissive avoidant and in healthcare, because they're just going to be more overloaded. And when they get home, they're going to go more into their little hole, sort of like they're, I had a client once who joked about it, who was a dismissive avoidant, and she joked about it being called the dismissive avoidant coma. And I like the terminology because it's like they just sort of zone out and tune out, and it's sort of a joke. But it, the more burden, the more that sort of takes place. So I wouldn't be surprised if that person doesn't respond. But if your pure intentions are to reach out and just provide support to somebody you care about, a great thing to do is just reach out and be like, hey, definitely not trying to violate the boundaries of what we shared and connected about. And, no need to get into a big conversation, but I know what's going on, and I know the field you're in, and I'm just reaching out to let you know that I am here as a friend if you need anything, or, which is sort of what you asked, do I offer support as a friend? And you can just say, like, I'm here as a friend if you need anything, hope you're okay. Something where it's just really calm. And I think that everybody really appreciates that. And I think that especially times like this, these things are well received. And even if the person doesn't respond in a timely manner, I think they'll feel it and appreciate it and feel some support from it. So last question. That was a great question. Last question. Diana says, hi, Diana. Diana says, hi, everyone. I'm glad I'm finally here. I hope to make the next webinar. In the meantime, I've watched the last 2 or 3 of them. And Thais, when you were addressing the questions about closure and relationships, I realized this is something I will need to pursue soon once I'm better prepared with someone I've known for 30 years. Well, I betrayed him back in 2010. But he just found out about it, not from me, when he was in Florida burying his father. I wondered why he didn't call me when his dad passed, and when I called to check on them, I could tell in his voice he knew. We haven't talked since. He's done with me for good. I really don't have a problem with that, but I've known this conversation would happen eventually. I have to communicate my apology very carefully, because although I don't think I do it intentionally, I can tend to manipulate when I'm owning my own stuff. These are great. I really appreciate the honesty in this message so far. It's really beautiful. I refuse to throw out the I was longing for connection card, or it felt so good to get that attention excuse, or I was not in my right mind because I've always believed that anyway. Okay, got to get to work. Okay, beautiful. So here's the thing. Best thing you're ever going to do when you're having a tough conversation is be honest, but not justify. So like if your truth was I was longing for connection, then say that if it's your truth. But you sound like you don't want to, so that's totally fine. But like if that is your truth, say it, but just say it differently. Like say what's true, but say, I was longing for connection and I messed up. I went about it in the wrong way, and I should have communicated to you about it. I should have shared that I was longing for connection. I should have shared my vulnerabilities, or I should have like connected more to myself, or sought out a community of people, or done something other than that. And, because the reason that the truth matters when you're trying to get past something is that people heal when they understand why you did what you did. Otherwise, they fill in the blanks with all their worst case scenarios. So the person might be like, I'm unworthy. I wasn't good enough. I was this, that, the other thing. And if they're carrying those things, then that hurts more. But if you say your truth, like I was longing for connection, I felt really disconnected and my needs for connection are different than yours. And I was, in a really tough space because of it. And then I did exactly what I should have known better than to do. And I horribly regret it, and I'm sorry for it. And there's no excuse for it. Like it was a mistake. It was the wrong thing. But it wasn't about you. It was about me not knowing a different way to get my needs met and making a mistake or whatever comes up. But here's what I would do. Own your truth in the best way possible. Like put everything down there. Get really clear about what your truth is. Like, why did I do what I did? And then explain it in a way that doesn't justify or make excuses, because owning your truth doesn't mean making an excuse. And if you can own your truth and then make sure you're not excusing it, then you'll see the best results for like sort of helping that person move through that experience as well, which will be really important. So great questions. And I just saw, I'm going to scroll back up the comments and play catch up for a second, but I just saw Jody's comment, and you're working in healthcare on the front lines. And I just want to let you know that we're all supporting you, and we're all very grateful for the work that you're doing. Because I know it's not easy, and thank you for doing that for everybody and for the community. So Princess Con, hi Princess Con. So she says, I tried to speak to my FA on Wednesday about the future, and he completely shut down. His demeanor became completely cold and devoid of emotion. He said strange things like he needs to be single for 2 years before getting engaged or married, and that he loves me but not like a wife, and that he is with me because I pursued him after our last breakup and not because he's actually with me. I think he means in love with me. It was very unexpected. His words don't match his actions. He's been trying hard to meet my needs on a daily basis. He's been showing up for me and has been listening to what I need and acting upon it right away. I don't know how to deal with this. We haven't spoken since, except when he asked me if I was okay the next day. I told him I was hurt and felt disrespected. He apologized, but no contact since. This is a huge step back and has made me physically anxious and depressed. I thought I had been making so much progress on myself and us, and now I feel like I feel thrown down a well again. I don't know if I should reach out. Finally decided to walk away, which I don't feel capable of in my current state, and I don't even know if he thinks we broke up and based on our conversation or not. I don't know what to do. Okay. Number one, I'm so sorry to hear that. Extremely challenging. I'm going to point out a few things in here. I've seen your comments and questions in here, and you've been doing a good job. Okay. Like, you've been showing up, you've been having the tough conversations, you've been learning, reprogramming. Like, I've seen this. Okay. Sometimes there will be people in life, and I'm not saying this is him, and definitely not definitively, and I'll get to that point in a moment, but sometimes there will be people in life where, as we keep moving the needle forward, as we keep adjusting and moving forward and progressing, that we're doing the work, we're putting it in, the person's putting them in back, and then it brings up their stuff. If they have commitment issues, or if they feel unwilling to be married, or maybe if it's not 100% the right fit in the relationship, maybe this person, moving the needle can push it in multiple directions, right? Moving the needle is always the right thing to want to do in a relationship. But sometimes you move the needle and it helps both or one party to realize that, wait, this isn't exactly the right relationship. And that could be a possibility, right? So in this case specifically, because he showed up this way in the situation, can it be a deactivating strategy and him just panicking and deactivating? Yeah, it definitely can be. What's the solution? You have to keep moving the needle. You have to get to the bottom of it, because, you're doing all this work, you're showing up, and it's so important to be in a relationship with somebody who's going to carry their weight. If they don't have to carry, it can be 60-40, it can be 55-45. But once we get past that, it's just not going to work long term that way. So I see you're showing up, you're working so hard. So what I would recommend is, I would say you understand the conversation. I would say I'm going to work really hard on. So I would reach out first, because I know you said, I don't know if he thinks we broke up or not. I would, he already reached out and said, are you okay? I would reach out and say, like, I need to confirm and have a proper conversation of closure if this was a breakup. If this was you freaking out or just being afraid, I need to know that too. And we need to figure out if it's possible to, like, reconcile this, because I have to be fair to myself in the process also, and I can't play the back and forth game. However, if you were just freaking out and you were just deactivating, tell me so we can at least have a conversation about it and see if there's a chance to repair. And if this is the end, I think we both owe it to each other to have a proper conversation around closure and be able to move on. And then if you feel like you really care about this person and you're really in love and you want to, like, it sounds like he was doing a good job too and he was showing up well. And if you're in a place where you've been invested in it for a long time, the most space I would hold for this person, and I would get really clear on if this is right for you first, because you don't want to just dive in and do this, but maybe say, like, listen, if you're panicking and you change your mind and you want to pursue something again, I'm not going to contact you at all. And I'll give you like 2 weeks to figure it out. Like, I'll give you 2 weeks to come back around. But if you come back around with 100% openness to working on things and moving ahead, because I will not go through this again. So this was really painful. If it's you freaking out and deactivating and you're just uncertain, I'm going to give you, and like, let's say it's the 21st, you say, okay, I'll give you till April 1st to turn it around and make things up, but that's it. And then you have to step away and not contact them. If you don't hear from this person, in the meantime, you're going to work on getting over the relationship. And I know that this is extremely difficult, but also you want to be clear. Like, if this person, and I know this is hard to see now, but in retrospect, this will show up. If this person's working and then they say, oh, I need 2 years to be single, and they have all these things, they might be at a different stage of their life and they may be unwilling to give you what you need from a relationship. And if you're showing up and you're pushing and you're like growing and working on yourself and doing all these things, you have to hold equal respect and space for yourself in this process. And you have to be able to say like, okay, I deserve better than somebody who isn't willing to commit and needs 2 years to figure it out and is just going to pause or put me on hold. So If it's commitment to marriage and the person's like, oh, I'm not ready to get married just yet, that might be a different type of conversation as long as they're committing to the relationship and moving things along. But you have to have a clear conversation about what's just happened as soon as you can. And I would just get really clear on your boundaries. Give the person a chance if you feel like it's appropriate based on the work they were doing. And you can say like, okay, I'm willing to hold space for X amount of time. Make that time window fairly small so that you're fair to yourself. And then say like, if this isn't, and if you are 100% sure that you're not ready, then we need to have a conversation with closure right now so we can both move on. And all you can do is keep trying to get to the bottom of it, move the needle forward, and then show up and focus on yourself and be true to yourself and your boundaries in the process. Okay. So I hope that that's helpful. And I'm sorry to hear you're going through that because I know you've been working really hard. Okay. So yeah. And don't worry, Princess Con, I think you just have to sign up for a Discuss account if you're looking for that. So, okay. So Ella says, hi, Ella. Hi, Thais. Is it true that the more fearful avoidant cares, the more they push away? And is it true that they fear rejection a lot, so they don't reach out to people who they care about and wait for them to reach out? It's a great question. I would say that it depends on the stage of a relationship that the fearful avoidant is in. So if it's in the dating stage, often what happens is the fearful avoidant can sometimes be like a pursuer. They tend to have a bit of a pursuer personality where they like go after what they want in life. Almost to a point of like fearlessness in different ways. So they can often be the pursuer, but it's when they start becoming vulnerable that they become afraid. And that's when they start to shut down. And this is when they can get really into their avoidant side. So once they start having really strong feelings, once the potential for a commitment takes place, like of an exclusive relationship, once there's like more trust required, things that are pushing on their comfort zone, more vulnerability required, this is when you'll start to often see this person sort of retract or take a step back or, these sorts of things. And they do fear rejection a lot. I would say that they fear rejection a lot, but they can repress it a lot, but there's definitely a lot of fear there. So that can prevent them as well from reaching out big time. So great questions. And I hope that that's helpful. So Nof, hi Nof. So hi Stacey, and Rachel. So Nof says, hi Thais, how do you deal with a dismissive avoidant who, when you express your hurt, is so avoidant around emotions, they make you feel bad about being sensitive? Okay, this is a great question. Oh, it continues. Being sensitive and avoiding them is not an option because they are family and you want to have a relationship with them, but you no longer feel safe bringing things up that they do that are hurtful because you feel dismissed. Okay, really great question. So this is always a big challenge, right? So number one of the most important things you want to do is practice validating your own emotions. Like your emotions, everybody's emotions in here listening right now, everybody's emotions ever are completely valid. Your emotions are gifts. They're like your guidance signals for life. They're letting you know when something is out of alignment. Okay. So emotions are not bad. What we do with our emotions becomes healthy or unhealthy, positive or negative. Emotions are never a negative thing. It's like saying the fact that I need to drink water is a negative thing, or the fact that I need to sleep as a human being is a negative thing. These are like biological components of ourselves. They're good. They're here for a reason. And if you didn't have emotions, human beings wouldn't have survived and evolved for so long because we wouldn't have been able to adapt to our environment or move on, these biological impulses or felt pain and when our needs are not met and then go out to get those needs met. Like there's so many layers to this. So with that being said, it's the way you communicate your emotions that can be healthy or unhealthy. So if they're saying, oh, you're sensitive, it's not uncommon that they're saying things like, oh, you're sensitive because they are afraid of taking accountability for different things. So what I would try doing is I would do this in a couple phases and sort of test what works for you. Phase one is try to change your approach in communication. So try to take all the emotion out of it when you communicate, because obviously this person can't handle that you have emotions, right? And that's okay. They might just be really trying to repress their emotions. And so maybe you expressing emotions scares them because it brings up the fact and the awareness that, oh, this makes me feel a certain way and I have emotions too. And maybe they're doing a lot to try to avoid owning the fact that they have emotions. Okay. So number one, definitely good to just try to change the approach. Communicate your needs in the positive instead of communicating what upsets you. So for example, if the person made a comment that was invalidating, you might say something like, hey, validation is really important to me in a relationship. And I notice I sort of pull away if criticism happens, and you might just share that. And you want to have it like as even keel in its tone as possible. Okay. So that's number one. Number two, if they do things that are like painful and they keep pushing and poking and you just find yourself like unable to transform the situation, but you're like, I want them to understand where I come from, try just setting a boundary instead. So instead of saying, this is what this is making me feel, or this is what I need, just start saying like, hey, when you talk to me about that, or when you talk to me like that, let's just pretend it's about the way they speak to you. That's not acceptable to me. So let me know when you're ready to change how you speak to me. So you can just set a hard boundary instead, which is like, this is a non-negotiable or this is unacceptable. And then if both of those things don't work, try them a few times, because you might have to tweak your approach and try different things. And it's a great opportunity to practice your communication skills, right? Especially with more challenging people. So try a couple things. And if you still find like, okay, this isn't working, and this is still painful, and it's just a toxic relationship because the dynamic's unhealthy, the person's unwilling to hold space for my needs, they make my feelings wrong, or they're trying to insinuate that they're wrong, they dismiss me, and so there's not proper room for connection. If you're finding all of these things, then the next thing that you're going to do is just reestablish different boundaries with this person, and how much time you share with them, and how much vulnerability and investment you put into the relationship, and just reestablish boundaries that are healthier for you based on who this person is. And that would be my advice. So great question. And I know this is a common question for a lot of people. So thank you for sharing that. Hi, AM. And Ruby, hello. Okay, so Rachel says, what are some strategies to identify stories we could be missing, aside from getting a therapist or coach? Sometimes I find it challenging to pinpoint exactly what's going on and what the stories are really saying. I posted a similar question in the forum, but it was very long, so this is the amended version. Beautiful. Okay, so really good way. I was just checking to make sure the question didn't, it looks like your question cut off, Rachel. It says, this is the amended version. Ha. Oh, you're saying ha. Okay. I thought it was the beginning of the word have. Okay, so great question. Really good way of finding all your stories, okay, is sit down and realize like the things that are challenging us and pushing on us way more often than not are about the meaning we're giving to the situation, way more so than the situation itself. So let's say that, let's pick a random topic together. Let's say that the thing that's triggering you is, let me think of a topic. It's the person at the grocery store who did whatever they did. Or let's just use like an example that's happening. So let's say COVID-19. Okay. So like, okay, this is causing me distress. So for some people, it's causing them distress for reasons that are different than others. So this is going to push on different points for different people, but some people are 8 out of 10 stressed and some people are 1 or 2 out of 10 stressed. What's the difference? It's the meaning that each individual is giving to it. Now I know you know this. So how do I find that meaning? I isolate or source the situation. So what is the stress or the stressor, like stressor, stressor. And it's COVID-19. Okay. What am I making it mean that this is, what meaning am I giving to the situation about COVID-19 that's creating distress? Maybe you're like, well, I'm afraid, and you can rephrase that question in a few different ways. You could say, what am I afraid of about COVID-19? What am I afraid will happen because of COVID-19? Or if, COVID-19 is stressing me out, what is bad about it that's creating distress? And what you want to do is dump as many things in there as you can. So let's say you're going, I make it mean that, everybody's going to die. I make it mean, put all the things that you're giving meaning to, and then those are the things that are your stories. And then you'll find, right? Then I have to work on those stories. Sometimes those stories might be true stories or things that are, already happening. I make it mean that the economy is going to be impacted. Well, that's happening. And if your stories are true, which more often than not, they're not true, because the mind tends to throw on a lot of exaggerations and worst case scenario sort of assumptions to things. But there are times when it is true. And if it is true, then you just move on directly to the need. Okay, so what do I need to make myself feel safe? And if If you're wanting to go a step deeper, you can also do this. You can go, the economy will crash. And then you look at it this way, right? The economy will crash. So let's say you write that down. And then you can go, okay, well, in theory, for some people, the economy crashing, they don't mind. They think it's a great time to buy property, or they think it's a great time to invest because, they're going to buy more stock or more. And so why does the economy crashing affect some people more than others? Well, it's because of the meaning I also give to the economy crashing. Now, it's also the unmet needs and things like that that are getting pushed on, but it's both, right? Or for most people, it's both. So what do I make it mean? Oh, I mean that I'm going to be unsafe. I mean that people I love are going to be unsafe. I make it mean that, and so for all the things where the stories are true, go find the needs what needs you have to make that feel better. So how can let's say you do feel like you might be unsafe because things are chaotic around you and maybe your neighbor has COVID-19, whatever. So then you go, okay, well, what do I need to feel safer? What are all the supportive things I can do for myself to feel safer in the situation? So basically you can just keep asking yourself, like, here's the situation. What's all the meaning I give to the situation? What do I then make that mean? Or why is that bad? Or what am I afraid could then happen? And as long as you keep cycling through those questions, you'll keep finding all these like embedded stories in there. And I like to think of like the more we're suffering, the more stories we have threaded and connected to the problem. So it's a whole bunch of different stories. It's 19 stories means lots of suffering, versus somebody carrying one little story is not going to hurt as much. So we really want to be able to like think of like we're extracting these things and then we're like sort of dissecting them and picking them apart and trying to find all the little details as much as possible. And that's how we're really getting our relief. So great questions. Okay, so reading a book, it talks about how we tend to automate our partners too, just like our brain automates everything else. As naturally done by the brain. It means that the brain processes steps automatically to be efficient, like the steps in riding a bicycle or reading or writing. Account once learned, the brain automates the steps and reproduces the same later automatically and is proud of doing so, of course. We do the same with relationships and our partners. Yeah, it's really true though. I love what you're sharing, but it's really true. Like we literally as human beings will just sort of put stories onto people, and that's why there's so much importance in the stability and commitment stages of a relationship. And if you guys have seen that course, it talks a lot about like have intentional patterns for connection. Keep trying to get to know your partner on a regular basis because we will all change. And if you just have your partner tucked away somewhere and there's the story of the past of who they were, it really limits the growth of the relationship. And we stop seeing each other as we see each other just through this lens or through this filter. And it can be really detrimental to a relationship long-term. So it's important to recognize. W.L. Hong, I intend to write a reply to your Facebook post, meant to do it earlier. That's nice. Okay, so I'm going to dive into some of the, hello, Halima. Nice to see you. Hi, Kelly and Jesse. And Justin, and who else is in here? Okay, a bunch of you guys. Hello, hi Annette, and Tracy. Hello. The reaction my DA happens. I can take a look for the. Hi Marcelo. Oh my gosh, or Marcos as well. Hi Marcos. A lot of you guys came in here. Okay, so so what I'm going to dive into for just a moment is a couple of points about the fearful avoidant and dismissive avoidant dynamic. I know I'm answering a lot of like attachment related questions in the first place. Hi, Claire. But I'm going to go through some of these and then we'll dive into some of these questions as well. Okay. By the way, I didn't make an announcement. The Abundance Mastery course is out just as of the other day. So that's out there, and the Advanced Fearful Avoidant course will be out shortly. So we're working hard away on those courses right now. So those are out there and check them out. They're really great courses. And is there any other announcement? I think those are all the announcements for today. Okay, so let's talk about the dynamic here for a moment, and then I'm going to dive right back into some of your guys' questions. So in terms of the dismissive and fearful avoidant in the dating stage of a relationship, one of the most prominent things you'll see is that usually in this dynamic, the fearful avoidant tends to be the pursuer overall. Now, the dismissive avoidant can be the pursuer in the early stages, but then usually the dynamic changes quite quickly because the dismissive avoidant will feel vulnerable faster and their need for connection is less. And then this can be like a really challenging part. Sometimes I'll see too if if a dismissive avoidant is super interested in a fearful avoidant and the fearful avoidant's not that interested in the dismissive avoidant, then sometimes the dismissive will be sort of the pursuer. And it's not uncommon that the fearful avoidant is really open to connection, but really doesn't invest in their relationships too much in the dating phase. Usually fearful avoidants are kind of aloof in their own way in a lot of the early stages and won't really pursue a lot of connection with a lot of care until the later parts of the dating phase or the honeymoon phase. And then the tables will sort of turn. These are the most common dynamics that I see. So if you have, I would actually say that dynamic is fairly common. Like I would say like 25-30% of the time that happens. And sometimes those relationships sort of work out because the dynamic sort of like moves through the stages of relationships, okay? But here are the common patterns. As soon as the fearful avoidant starts to get strong feelings, they either try to withdraw and become avoidant themselves, which sometimes can actually bring out like characteristics of the dismissive of wanting to get closer. They're not like super anxious, but they will desire closeness and it sort of shifts the patterning. They'll never, or I'll say they'll very rarely like pursue like the way somebody who's really anxiously preoccupied, attached would if they felt like somebody was withdrawing. Because in that case, like they won't call incessantly or keep reaching out. Like they might just sort of initiate a little bit more. But that's from a place of more desire instead of like attachment trauma being triggered. And so what we'll often see in this dynamic, though, is that the fearful avoidant, as soon as they start to develop strong feelings, experience vulnerability, they start to pull down or pull away, or they start to become more volatile. And this is one of the most intense challenges as the dating phase sort of moves towards the honeymoon phase, and then we get into like the early parts of the power struggle. Because remember, for the fearful avoidant, I guess you guys haven't taken this course yet, but we've talked about it in some of the webinars. For the fearful avoidant, they're the only attachment style that as soon as they get into the honeymoon phase, they almost like simultaneously have their foot in the power struggle phase at the same time, because that much vulnerability usually triggers that much fear. And that fear really triggers a swinging of like going from anxious to avoidant, anxious to avoidant. And there's that ambivalence and inner chaos that eventually expresses itself as emotional volatility. So what can happen is that can start triggering the dismissive avoidant. And often if the dismissive avoidant isn't really invested in the relationship at this point and doesn't have extremely, extremely strong feelings, or if the dating phase hasn't been dragged out for long enough where it's still kind of fresh for the dismissive avoidant, this can be one of the first catalysts that causes the relationship to break down, because dismissive avoidants are extremely sensitive to emotional volatility. And these are almost like sort of a deal breaker type of thing for the dismissive avoidant. And so they can have all this fear that sort of arises, and then this need to push back and protect themselves from the situation. So that's the first sort of set of challenges we'll see in the dating and then early honeymoon / power struggle stage for the fearful avoidance specifically. So I'm going to go through the next stages in a little bit, but I'm just going to take a break and come to some of the questions here again. So, hi, Jesse. Hello, Justin. And Annette. Yoga is a great thing to do. And Claire, she's seen this. This is personal. I don't know. I think I missed your earlier comment, Marcos. She's seen this. This is personal. Thanks, Rachel. Hi, Marcos. I'm wondering who's seeing what. I'm curious. 100 out of 100. I submitted a question to Tracy. I didn't see a question in the forum. Sometimes if you don't have I'm just going to double, triple check here for a moment. But if you sometimes don't create a discuss account properly, okay, it's definitely not in the forum part. Unless you put it maybe in the Q&A part. If you put it in since the webinar started, yes. Okay, good. Yeah, I think you put it in like right as the webinar was starting. Okay, so Tracy says, hi, Thais. I'm FA and my husband is DA. He will often tell me he is leaving to do something the moment he is leaving. I've asked him to let me know beforehand multiple times because we have 2 children. I work from home, and now I'm homeschooling our children because the schools are closed due to COVID-19. It is frustrating to me because I do not get time to myself, and now we cannot leave the house. He still goes to work. This morning he told me that he was going to go fishing with his brother as he was leaving. I texted him after a bit and said that I'm totally fine with going, but I appreciate knowing beforehand. I said that the week had just been stressful with everything going on. We also had an earthquake this week. Oh my goodness. Hope you're okay and you're safe and everything's all right. Sounds like a lot. He immediately texted me back and said that he wouldn't go, and what did I need him to do? That's nice. I told him that I wasn't asking him to stay. I was just asking him to let me know beforehand. He said that he was staying. However, he has been moping all morning. Someone called him and he told them, I'm home. I'm always home. I don't do anything. Okay. He's getting into his own stories here, eh? Like getting right into his own sort of victimhood storytelling. Okay. I could tell that they asked if he goes to work and he confirmed that he did. Now he has been playing video games all morning, which I don't mind, but I feel like the moping is his way of pushing me away, or I really hurt his feelings. Please help me to understand why he would react that way. Okay, I definitely know why he's reacting that way. I also mentioned in the message that I wasn't trying to control him or mess with his autonomy. I wanted him to go because I knew if he said he would act this way. Any insight? How can I approach it better? Okay, so to be honest, you started out with a pretty good approach. Like, you did a good job. I would go to him and I would say this. I would start and I would say, I really support you going fishing. Like, I want you to be able to do things. I don't want you to feel like you're stuck here at all. But what I'm feeling is like communication is so important to me. I'm happy to hold space for you to do all of those things. But the reason, and this will really help a lot, it's such a fine tuning of the communication, but it'll help a lot for him to understand why. Because what he's just done, and I can see it really clearly objectively, is he's projected his stories onto it because there were a little bit of blanks that weren't filled in. So he, even though you're saying, oh, I'm not trying to do things, he's like, oh, I'm going to be in trouble if I don't do things, like stay here. And so even though you weren't trying to force him to do that, I think he gave that meaning to the situation. And then I think he's probably going through some of his own wounds, as dismissive avoidant would be during this time. And some of those triggers are things like being trapped, being helpless, being confined, not having control over himself or his environment. Like, these are core wounds for the dismissive avoidant. And I think that he's sort of exacerbating them because he's not probably feeling so good about the situation. So what you want to do is be really clear and be like, I know, and maybe even validate his feelings. Like, I know that this is a tough time. I know you're probably feeling a little bit trapped. I'm not intending to make you feel like that. I just need space. And this is where you really fill in the blanks. I just need a little bit of space to see what's happening with the kid, like to be able to plan ahead for what's happening with the kids, because I've got work to do and I'm looking out for them. And when my plans get dropped on their head, because we don't have 2 people here to be in this supporting role, I feel really under pressure and I feel a little bit sort of overwhelmed with the mix of everything. And so I want us to be able to hold space for each other in the best way possible. And even though I know you sort of can make decisions based on how you feel at the last minute, the more you can communicate with me, the better. And probably part of the problem too is that he probably doesn't make decisions until literally like, oh, I feel like going fishing, so I'm going to go. And so he'll feel a little bit of learned helplessness because at a deeper subconscious level, he's like, oh, you're asking me to plan. And that doesn't feel good because I don't want to plan and I don't really plan. And so now you're telling me I have to plan. And now he's assuming that that's stealing his autonomy as well. He won't necessarily be able to like make that whole link. But you can just say, like, even if you can give me an hour warning, or even if you can give me, even if you don't know what you're going to be doing, but you're considering doing something like going fishing, or you're feeling an urge to get out of the house, if you can share that with me, even if it doesn't come through, it gives me space to sort of turn things and figure out what I'm doing and how I can adapt to the situation. And I really need a little bit of certainty right now. And in return, I'm happy to respect your freedom and autonomy. So fill in the blanks. Be aware that he probably isn't going to be that great at planning, because most dismissive avoidants struggle with this a little bit. And just say, even if you're thinking about something, let me know so I can prepare. And then let's try to work through this together and communicate together and hold space for each other's needs collaboratively, instead of getting into a space where we're frustrated with one another. And so doing that and validating his feelings as well is a really great strategy in this situation. So I hope that that's helpful. And great question, by the way. And I hope everything's okay with the earthquake and just everything going on, because it sounds like a lot. So Rachel says, all this information makes me want a long-term relationship so I can practice all the skills and tools I've gained and sharpened by doing the work. I guess it's just friends and family for now. Yeah, listen, your friends and family are going to be the best practice. Like family especially, because the more family, there's a great quote by Ram Dass, and he says, if you think you're enlightened, then go spend a weekend at home with your family. Because you've got years and years and years of triggers here stored in your subconscious, years, right? Since you can remember some of the deepest, most imprinted patterns. And so when we can really master those relationships and how we communicate and relate, that sets the tone for everything else. So you're doing great work. And when the time comes, it'll be perfect. So yeah, Jamie says the same thing. So Justin says, I was the type who could never be alone ever. I heard hundreds of people because of my selfishness. We must love ourselves before we can love others, period. We come into this world selfish, and then our parents end up making us even more selfish. The primary responsibility of a parent is to transform children from being selfish to selfless. I like that. Love is best defined as patient, kind selflessness. I love that. That's really sweet. This is just me. There is no better. This is Ruby. This is just me. There is no better out there if I am not better with myself. It is my experience, and it takes so much to be better with myself. I will be chasing after the ghost, looking for better out there, and disappointed. You guys have some really wise, insightful things to share today. I love it. So Jessie says, Thais, what is the sign a DA is doing the work and trying to overcome their fear of being vulnerable? Great question. Also, I think DA always perceive that they are not understood by others. You're correct. It's a big core wound. Good job. You're doing great. So they don't try to explain and make others understand them. What are your thoughts? I think that is, you hit the nail on the head. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with dismissive avoidants over the years who say things like, I don't want to explain myself to other people because it doesn't feel good. And when I dig into it with them, what they're actually experiencing is trying to avoid the core wound of being misunderstood. And when they're not naturally understood, and their boundaries aren't naturally respected, and how they're showing up and approaching a situation or responding to a situation isn't naturally understood by their friend or family member or partner, they give this meaning that they're misunderstood, and they push away, and then they don't want to explain themselves again because they don't want to expose themselves to that fear of being misunderstood and it being a core wound again. And so that's really common in these sorts of situations. And you really hit the nail on the head there. So what is the sign that they're trying to do the work and overcome their fear of being vulnerable? If you see them consistently trying to have the tougher conversations, or even just opening up differently, like sharing more, even complimenting more, validating more, communicating more directly, as long as you see that there's some kind of action taking place, or there's a shift in their patterns, especially around communication, validation, affection, self-expression, these sorts of things, these are all signposts that things are leading in the right direction. And it takes time. Like for dismissive avoidance, I would say that they tend to be sort of like the slowest moving. I would say that they're the slowest moving out of all the attachment styles when it comes to doing the work. Just as a general rule, it's not always the case. But they usually take a little more time to sort of like get reprogrammed through exposure response to feeling comfortable being vulnerable, or feeling safe, or feeling like it's good or it's the right thing to do. But over time, things end up really turning around and working nicely. So just be patient if you see consistent progress. It's a really great sign. Paul says, hi, Paul. Hi, what to do in response to a DA's authentic, heartfelt, I love you, and you'll be happier with someone else? Oh, it's a tough one. So kind of is like a heart-wrenching one. So a lot of dismissive avoidants carry a big core belief that they can't meet somebody else's needs because it doesn't come naturally to them. And a lot of their programming doesn't sort of revolve around it. So a lot of them carry this deep belief that's like, I can't meet somebody else's needs, so there's no point. And I've heard a lot of dismissive avoidants say over the years, this person would be happier with someone else. My wife would be happier with someone else. My husband, my partner would be happier with someone else. It's not uncommon that I hear this. And it's because dismissive avoidants will often explain how they feel about emotions as like this big cloud that's confusing, or this sort of like body of water over there that I can't swim in. Or I've heard all these like expressions over the years, and they're all different expressions, but they say the same thing. And they're essentially saying, I feel extremely disempowered and confused in this area, and I don't trust myself to be able to show up properly. So then when they have a partner who's saying, I need you to do this, I need you to do this, the game changer in a relationship, and it might be tough if you're out of a relationship, but in a relationship, the game changer is that the dismissive avoidant needs clear direction on what to do in a relationship. If they have clear direction, they feel like, oh my God, like the clouds have parted and the sun shines through. Like they really feel, because dismissive avoidants largely want to meet their partner's needs. I've had tons and tons of conversations over the years with people who seem on the outside in a relationship like they're just shut down and push away. But when you really dig into it, they're like, I really want to meet my partner's needs. If only I knew how, or if only I understood it better, or if only I could swim in that body of water, or if only that cloud wasn't so confusing to me. So when that confusion is lifted, they don't have this like disempowerment, helplessness, fear of being criticized because they don't do the right thing or they don't feel capable of doing it properly. And as soon as that's lifted, that's when we really start to see the relationship dynamics transforming. And so it's really important to note here that as you're sort of diving into this situation, it depends where you are in the relationship, Paul. Like if the relationship is over and you are still trying, and if it's fair to you and it's the right thing and you still really want to sort of transform it, a great thing to do is to say, I'm learning a lot of things we could have done differently. And I'm realizing how important it is for me to just clearly express to you what I need. And I don't think I would be happier with somebody else. I love you and I want to make it work and I want to give it another shot. And if you feel like that's fair to you and the relationship is fair to you and you want to apply different strategies, then that's a good thing to say. But like obviously this person cares, but this is what I hear completely. Like, here's the message. I love you and I don't trust myself to know how to navigate a relationship. And I think there's always going to be pain and I'm going to feel disappointed. You're going to feel disappointed and I'm going to feel incapable. And so it can't work. And so it's really about how can you clean up the second part of that sentence? How can we start communicating differently, try new strategies? And really a lot of it's like lifting the fog through direct communication of your needs consistently and then positive reinforcement when they're met. So the person learns to believe that they can navigate a relationship. So I hope that's helpful. But again, if you're going to open that door, make sure that you do it from a place of like checking in that this is fair to you. Like if this person's been consistently unavailable and you know they're not willing to do the work and they're not even open, then I wouldn't put yourself in a compromising position either. Okay, good question. So Justin says, as a former teacher, I can attest that every skill can be taught. Confidence is the key to everything in life. If you have difficulty communicating feelings, understand once this becomes a habit, it will become easier to do. These are great comments. Those who have difficulty sharing feelings can transform into the complete opposite. All it takes is trying, practice, and resilience. Over time, you will become confident. Keep a journal and document your anxieties. Determine the need, and if the fear is realistic, I call this after building. You will eventually realize your fears are invalid. Most of us fear what will never happen. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So what I appreciate a lot about this is like a huge theme and what you're saying is consistency. Like it's so important to have consistency. And if you practice something consistently over time, eventually it becomes your autopilot functioning. Like your subconscious just ingrains these things as patterns and they feel natural. And I will attest to that. Like I've seen so many people who are like terrified of communicating, terrified of vulnerability, terrified of opening up or expressing their needs. Do it the first few times, feel a little more empowered, get consistent at it for a few weeks, and suddenly that's their new normal in relationships. So great comments in there. So Jesse says, Thais, another comment, maybe off topic. Will you be considering to add some content on how each attachment style shows up in a workspace with a work situation? Yeah. I feel I'm triggered nowadays in work, and I want to know if I can use the attachment theory in a workspace as well. So I would say that your attachment, it's so funny, but what I found, I think I put a video out about this once, but I'll definitely add some stuff to this, like big time inside the school. But what I found is that your primary attachment figure in your adult life is obviously a romantic relationship, but we still tend to carry the patterns of our perceived relationships from our parental figures, and we project those patterns onto our bosses. So usually the authority figures, because your associations, your subconscious programming around authority in childhood is mom and dad. And so I often see people play out those same attachment styles. So let's say you're fearful avoidant. And let's say you feel rebellious against authority because you felt that you had to fight back or make room for yourself or rebel to get your needs met or whatever it is. It's very common that fearful avoidants then struggle with work authority figures and prefer to, I'm sure many of you guys in here are like this, or fearful avoidant, prefer to connect. Sorry, I just started reading one of the comments. Prefer to connect over, sorry, I got really distracted because I started reading the comments. So let's say you're the fearful avoidant in the situation with your boss. Oftentimes, like, it's like, oh, I want to work for myself. I don't want to work under somebody. I don't want to work. And it's not usually like this pretentious thing. It's this like rebellion against authority and not liking an authority figure and feeling like you have to be hypervigilant and that these things will come up for you. And so often most fearful avoidants, for example, reproject those same stored associations because of that same triggered programming that comes up in the subconscious. Anxious, preoccupied often feel this great need to people please their boss, really connect to them, sort of like latch on and build a close emotional relationship, and can sometimes be like, not always at all, but sometimes be like the brown nosers or the, like the trying to like the type that like gives the apple to the teacher kind of thing, like really trying to build that connection. And that's like for them to feel safe and secure. They want that connection to that person. Dismissive avoidance, they can sort of keep their head down and tend to be good at like following the rules and taking direction and just doing things because they can sort of shut off their emotions. And that's what they did to survive in childhood. And so we tend to really have a lot of these patterns reestablished in these adult romantic relationships. So great questions and points in here. Hi, Ben. And hi, Kelly. Don't worry for being late. Don't worry. Let me see. Hi, Christy. Sorry, sometimes my thing jumps and skips through. Hi, Shayna and Anna. Nice to see you guys. Hi, Halima. Okay, so Rachel says, what if all our need buckets were full before a triggering event? How can we truly reprogram a belief so it doesn't trigger us out of the blue? Okay, what if all of our need buckets are full? So I'm going to make a distinction here. So even if all of our need buckets are really full and we're feeling really great in our needs, if we have a painful story, that will trigger us too. Because remember, the two things that trigger us in life are our needs being unmet and our painful stories, meaning our thoughts and beliefs, the way we're perceiving a situation. And so even if your needs are full, you can still have a trigger in the belief area or the thought area. So let's say, for example, that you're really happy in your life and you've got all sorts of empowerment and great relationships and all these wonderful things in all 7 areas of your life. But then let's say you have this stored trust wound, and then somebody at work, you find out that they betrayed your trust, and they, it's still going to trigger you even if your needs are met because there's some old wound coming up in the situation. Now, if you can work on your stories and then go communicate about the need, that's how you solidify it. But reprogramming just is basically the consistency over time of doing these things, questioning these stories, creating new associations, perceiving things from outside of your traditional perspective that was causing pain, and consistently meeting your needs, and doing this over time until these new neural pathways have sort of fired and wired and ingrained more deeply in you so it becomes your new normal. So good question. Oslam says, Oslam's chatting with Justin. Yeah, it's important to have like selflessness, but also showing up for yourself at the same time. Because if you were it's interesting, like people can sort of come in polarities. There are some people, and I say this to people a lot, there's some people who actually need to work on like releasing some of their programming, like actually need to learn, like let's say dismissive avoidance, for example. It's really important for dismissive avoidance to start learning how to give and take and rewire and like sort of become more selfless and practice that. Then sometimes we have like fearful avoidance or anxious individuals, or fearful on the anxious side, who like have no boundaries, no regard for themselves, drive themselves into the ground to please other people, and like actually need to learn to take themselves into consideration. And so where you stand on that spectrum will determine which way you need to move to get back into harmony and balance. And it's a really important recognition. So great comments in there. Would love for you to answer when you get a chance. Oh, another amended piece from my long form. I didn't see your long form questions. Sometimes they don't post them. I'll go back and look in just a second though. Sometimes they're too long. They don't like post them for some reason, or you have to go back in there or something, but I'm going to go double check in a moment. Thais, the therapist I follow on Insta, talks a lot about somatic therapy, and she recently posted about how we shouldn't try to change our thoughts, but rather our emotional state, which would then affect our thoughts. Okay. What are your thoughts on that and somatic therapy in general? Number one, huge fan of somatic therapy. I've done a lot of, I've done a certification and a lot of work in this area, but the problem is that your beliefs and thought patterns produce your emotional state. So it's really important to address from the body-oriented state as well, and from the emotional space specifically, but that's not the full picture. Like there's a huge missing piece there that's extremely important. So it's like this. Let's say I have Bob and I have Tom, and let's say both of their wives just filed for divorce, okay? And let's say Bob is thinking thoughts about the divorce like, wow, this is really painful and this is hard, but I think we'll come back from this. Let me see what I can take from this situation. Let me see how I can grow. What do I need to learn about this situation? How can I communicate better? What led to this? How can I build a friendship? And let's say he's having these thoughts that are like questions being posed about the situation, where he's trying to form like healthy perceptions. He's trying to practice acceptance. He's thinking about how he can learn and grow from the situation. Those thought patterns and the way he's choosing to think and perceive the situation produce the emotional responses. And traditionally, belief and thought patterns produce the emotional output. Then it recycles back around. But it's those belief and thought patterns produce a lot of those, that output of emotions. Now let's hold that next to, and those beliefs can just be associations that are automatic as well. So it'll feel like an automatic feeling, but that's what's happening beneath the surface at the subconscious level. If you're then holding, let's say that was Tom thinking that way about the divorce, and you're holding him next to Bob, and Bob's going, nobody's going to love me again. I'm too old to ever be in a relationship again. I'm going to die alone. Wow, what a difference in those two perspectives. Who's suffering more? And who's putting themselves in just a tremendous uphill battle when it comes to healing from the situation? Well, obviously Bob. That's like excruciating. And usually people who are perceiving things that way have a lot of those thoughts. Then those create patterns of emotions, which create patterns of imprints in the subconscious mind and nervous system. And then we have those body related issues. Then we can do things like somatic experiencing work to try to release some of those stored feelings from the body. But if we're not taking care of the thoughts and beliefs, gym and working out for 3 hours to try to like equilibrate for that or fix the problem, but then going back and eating chocolate all day again, and then going back to the gym, like you could just adjust your eating habits and then you could still be exercising, but not so intensely. So it's like, you need to take all pieces into consideration. And when it comes to real healing, if we're not taking our beliefs and thoughts or our perceptions into consideration, we're missing probably the biggest chunk of the puzzle. The body and somatic therapy is excellent, and it does a lot for wonderful, like deep emotional releases. But we have to be in charge of the way we're perceiving things and reprogramming at the same time. Those things are not mutually exclusive. So great question. I'm really glad you raised that, because I'm really passionate about that point. I see a lot of practitioners in different areas being really masterful in what they do, but ignoring certain parts of the puzzle. So is this true? Fearful avoidants need expressions of commitment to feel secure, but DAs find expressing and verbalizing this as oppressive. It's a great question, Jay. So often it's not expressive. I didn't feel it necessary to include boundaries in what I stated. I assume boundaries were a given. Yeah, excellent. Okay, so is it true? It's not necessarily oppression, like, or oppressiveness, but I guess it's like, you could say oppression. It sort of just depends on like the wording. But often dismissive avoidants feel afraid to like express things and then have an expectation put on them, because I guess exactly like you're saying, that expectation feels oppressive to the DA. So oftentimes they're like, oh, now if I do something nice, I hear these things all the time. If I do something nice, this person's going to expect it from me always. They're going to expect that I'm always at this standard. And so they get afraid to put themselves out there, to express the future, to do these different things, because often they're afraid of being like locked into that expectation, burdened, these sorts of things. So do fearful avoidants need expression of commitment? They don't need expression of commitment as much as they need expression of like validation, love, mattering. So there's a way around this. Like fearful avoidants, as long as they feel like they're loved, they're wanted, and they can trust, and that people care, these are all like big pain points for the FA, then that to them, I would say overall probably supersedes commitment. They sort of assume like, okay, this is good, we're in a space. Definitely an expression of commitment will make them feel safer, but it can also, an expression of commitment can also trigger the fearful avoidant a little bit. Like, oh, commitment means all these things. And so a lot of fearful avoidants have commitment issues as well. So I would say the safest space for the FADA dynamic is more this balance between less expression of like the need for commitment and everything in the future, but more about, do we matter? Do we care? Are we supporting each other? Are we making each other feel safe? This is going both ways for the DA too, right? And do we love and want to be together and spend our time together? And are we, in the relationship that way? And if those things are met, then there's less pressure from either party to put on like the future and the planning for the future. So I hope that makes sense. Hi, Kelly again. Considering others. These are great comments in here. I'm seeing some of these comments, which is beautiful. A lot of these interesting discussion topics you guys are sharing in here. Yep, I agree, Christy. Like the Buddhist view of self versus the Western view of selfless. It's wonderful. I just literally laughed out loud at the idea of FAs being in the honeymoon phase and the power struggle phase simultaneously. I feel immense gratitude for my old relationships. Bless my exes. So you'll see this when the advanced FA course comes out, but like one of the dynamic things about the fearful avoidant is that usually as soon as there's really strong feelings, there's all these really strong patterns that come up too of needing to pull away, feeling afraid, all these different dynamics. So they tend to be in both phases at the same time. Yep, beautiful. These are really nice conversations, you guys. So Kelly says, what if an FA is with someone who came up as FA or DA? Any counsel on this model? So when you say came up, do you mean like was raised FA or DA? What if an FA is raised with somebody or is with somebody who was raised FA or DA? I think that's your question. Do you mind asking that again? And I'm going to come back down and check on it. Because I'm going to see what shows up there. And yeah, like I would say overall, if your question is like, what if a fearful avoidant is with somebody who is brought up as fearful or dismissive avoidant, you're going to see the same sort of dynamic. So like just a fearful and a dismissive together, you're going to see those challenges in the dating phase and honeymoon phase. If the fearful and dismissive make it into the power struggle stage, where like both parties are there, so it's been like a pretty prolonged period of time, you're going to see like a lot of rocking of the boat more so. Sometimes dismissive avoidants will stick in relationships for longer throughout the power struggle stage with a fearful avoidant, even when like most are going to get shifty and flighty and want to run away from conflict and instability. But sometimes you'll see the dismissive avoidant stays longer if they're afraid of like the relationship ending and if they're afraid of the instability of breaking up or breaking apart, or if they just have a tremendous amount of investment in the relationship. Like sometimes it's two lighter FA and DA where both aren't extremely fearful or extremely dismissive. And then they sort of go through that dynamic in the relationship and it can be challenging for sure, but sometimes it's not like a severe volatility. And one of the first things I would say is like, if anybody here is fearful avoidant, one of the most important things you want to know is that emotional volatility is like sort of a relationship killer. Like it's one of the first things that will end a relationship, especially with a dismissive avoidant. What happens in the power struggle stage between these two is that the dismissive avoidant even more so becomes withdrawn. So like if you thought you saw the withdrawing of the Dismissive in the earlier stages of a relationship, you're not even seeing the full picture until this stage of the relationship. And the reason for this is the power struggle stage is sort of the space and time in a relationship that both individuals are required to like reintegrate their sense of self and identity back into the relationship more fully. So this is a time where you'll see the dismissive avoidants seek for their sense of self and go out of their way to protect their feelings and needs more so than they had in the past. And this can be really alarming for the fearful avoidant because it usually re-triggers the fearful avoidant and their fears and their wounds even more. And so what's really important is this is a great time to start opening up like conflict resolution communication. So to be able to say, hey, I notice you're pulling away. This is what I'm making it mean. This is what I need. Are you capable of providing it? Where are you, why are you pulling away? Can you help me to understand how can we get both of our needs met through creative strategies? Like one of the most important things you're going to find for this dynamic period is that fearful avoidance, most of you guys who are fearful avoidant or identify with that attachment style, even if you've become more secure, fearful avoidance generally would rather just not have a conversation than to have a surface level conversation. It's very like a lot of fearful avoidants really crave and value like depth of emotional connection, important conversation, communication about things that are meaningful. And they often feel like almost more disconnected and triggered by surface conversation between them and their very close relationships, loved ones, romantic relationships, etc. So what the fearful avoidant really requires is actually has a lot less to do with quantity of time, but all about the quality of time, how deep the conversation was, how present both parties were, how much both people decided to be vulnerable and open up. These are like the really important factors for the fearful avoidant. The dismissive avoidant often feels afraid of having to give too much energy expenditure through like too much quantity of time. And both of them are like, oh, we look at time together as through these lenses that are actually conflicting and create sort of the breeding grounds for a lot of miscommunication. So what you want to have is the dismissive avoidant to be really clear that quality of time, if you give 30 minutes a day of being present, that's going to supersede 2 hours a day of watching television together or doing something that's not like connecting. And the fearful avoidant is going to, so both parties can be like pleased and their needs can get met through creating healthy patterns where like quality of time is there, and then the dismissive avoidant doesn't have to feel like they're trying to like protect their time and save their free time, and the fearful avoidant doesn't have to feel rejected because their needs are getting met from the relationship. But we have to be able to have clear communication in order to achieve that in this specific dynamic. And then the other key points in here are like dismissive avoidants just want to know so badly, because fearful avoidants can become quite critical when they're triggered. Dismissive avoidants want to know so badly what you want from them very specifically. And I don't mean like, hey, I need to be loved more, or hey, I need more time. Like dismissive avoidants want it like this. And it's not romantic. It's not like this, movie romantic way of communicating, but it's ultimately going to create the most romance possible in your relationship dynamic. So dismissive avoidants want to know, how much time will that be? When will we spend that time? What will we spend that time doing that's actually going to get your needs met so I'm doing a good job? And they want all the details. They want to know, like, at 4:00, we are going to talk about this thing, and it's going to be for about an hour, and and here's how you can do it that will work so I'll feel satisfied. If they have that kind of communication, they feel empowered, they want to meet needs, and usually the relationship starts to really evolve. And then the fearful avoidant, it's really interesting. It's kind of like the inverse. They want to know from the dismissive avoidant exactly why the dismissive avoidant is doing what they do. So just like the dismissive wants to know exactly what needs you need to get met, and they want all the blanks filled in, the fearful avoidant wants the same thing, but about the reason that the dismissive avoidants are needing space or needing more time away. And if both parties commit to that, it's like a game changer in the relationship. It really puts both parties at ease and sets a lot of fears to rest and makes both parties feel empowered to navigate the dynamic better. So that's one of the most important things in this relationship. So I hope that makes sense. And yeah, so you guys are still just chatting. Nice. Okay, so yeah. Hi, Ben and Stacy. Oh, this is so familiar, and me too, about everything you said, Rachel. Nice. Hi, Max. How are you? Nice to see you. I know it's late there. So Jay says, Thais, do DAs experience empathy differently, or is it seen as not their emotional business? Okay, great question. So to be honest, most DAs are extremely empathetic people. And I know people are like, oh my gosh, blah, blah, blah. A lot of times, like, DAs with a negative sort of like if they have like a personality disorder or things like that, like they're not experiencing empathy. But I would say the vast majority of DAs are extremely empathetic, but they tend to empathize in ways that are safe. So like I would say the most extreme DAs that present as very unempathetic towards people often are like extremely empathetic towards animals, but it's because they feel safe to feel for these animals because they don't perceive these animals as a threat. And I want you guys to think about it this way when you're trying to sort of understand this. Let's say we take an extreme dismissive avoidant, and let's say they don't present as empathetic, but then they're empathetic to animals. I want you to imagine that you're in like a fight or flight space. So let's say you're not a dismissive avoidant, you're a different attachment style. And let's say you're in a fight or flight space where you're like, whatever it might be, you're triggered and you think like your survival is based on the situation. So you feel like you are on your way to work and you're going to be late. And if you're late, your boss has explicitly said to you, you don't have a job if you come in late one more time. And you know, if I don't have a job, I can't pay my bills at the end of this month. And now you're feeling like, oh my gosh, my world is like really feeling threatened and unsafe. When you're in that state, you're not really the best empathizer with other people. Like if somebody cuts you off or your parent calls or your friend calls and they want to tell you about how tough their day is, you don't really have a lot of room for that in that moment. It doesn't mean you're incapable of empathizing. It means you don't feel safe enough on your own to even be able to empathize properly for somebody else. And so extreme DAs, when they were like, their nervous system was essentially trained to be in this extreme fight or flight state for prolonged periods of time. When they're in that state and they're feeling unsafe, they don't really want to empathize with people who also feel unsafe to them, right? Because a lot of their wounds were from people and this lack of being able to connect or feeling empowered in connections. And so they do have a lot of empathy, but it's for things that they can empathize with because they feel safe feeling for those things or feeling towards those things, right? So that's one sort of piece that I think is important to recognize. And then the other part is that they tend to experience empathy differently from the perspective of that they experience it a lot more internally. So they usually like internalize their feelings a lot more. So they'll feel empathy for other people or sadness, but they may not act on it because they may not know what to do, or they might sort of adopt the perspective like, well, geez, if that was happening to me, I wouldn't want anybody to approach me because I would want to withdraw and be private and be protected. And so they'll sometimes empathize. It's not necessarily their emotional experience of empathy is different. It's more like their response to the empathy is different that they're feeling. So it's more like they would assume that, oh, Bob over there who's experiencing this hard time, geez, if I was Bob, I wouldn't want anybody asking me anything or bothering me. I would want people to respect my privacy and space to self-soothe. And so they'll naturally, because we project onto others and assume that our perception is their perception, they'll naturally try to give what they would want. And it can seem sometimes like they're not super caring or empathizing, but that's really not what's happening. So I hope that makes sense. It's a really great question. Hi, Ben. So Ben says, is it normal for FADA to get better at all relationships but romantic ones? Doing great with everyone, but getting close to women is triggering me and I default to old behaviors, which won't work for my current relationship goals. Yeah, so this is the hardest space. So the fact that you're seeing like progress in all these other relationships is a great sign because it means you're practicing the tools, you're working through things. It's wonderful, but you're going to have the most pushback from your nervous system and subconscious mind because our adult romantic relationships replace our early childhood caregiver relationships. So there's more like fear and vulnerability and emotional weight there. So what I highly recommend is picking really tiny things you can start off with. So if you have these goals, for example, and it's like meet a new woman and share personal things. Dial it way in, make it like half the size that it currently is, and give yourself, and then you're using exposure response work. So make it half the size. So maybe it's just meet a new woman and share something very small about myself, just something about my likes or dislikes. And once I feel comfortable sharing about those things that are a little bit personal, then I'll share something more personal about my feelings. And then I'll share. And so just like pick things that are incrementally progressing you. And that's actually going to be the fastest way of getting there, because you're not going to get pushback from your nervous system. And then when you do these things, try to intentionally elicit an emotional response that lets you know that you are safe. So let's say you shared something and part of you is like, oh no, I just shared something and it feels so personal and I want to just go hide away. Use your mind to be conscious and think conscious thoughts and go, okay, this is safe. Like, I'm in a safe place. Nobody's going to physically hurt me. I shared something personal. People do it all the time. It's a normal part of relationships. It might be outside of my comfort zone, but it's safe for a lot of people and nothing really terrible is happening right now. And so the more you can be consistent at like trying to create safety and just taking smaller bites, you'll see that there's progress in the fastest way possible in that area. But it's just, you have a bigger war with yourself if you've got like the DA side of FA, it sounds like, as your dynamic, there's just more like resistance from your nervous system and all your deprogramming. So it's just important to like bite-sized chunks and a lot of consistency as much as possible over time. So that repetition is really going to ingrain that new set of programming. And if it's not with a romantic partner, just do it consistently with other people as much as possible and practice more and more vulnerability. And then it'll at least start carrying over more into romantic relationships. And you can even do it with like potential dating partners. Like if it's just people on a dating site or people, like just practice sharing, connecting, doing things that push your comfort zone, even if you're not, like trying to dive right into something right at the same time or all at once, because it might pay off with the right person. And then you'll feel really motivated to continue that journey. So great work. And I'm not necessarily recommending dating sites. I've actually never personally been on a dating site, and I often hear bad stories from people. So I'm not necessarily saying like that's the way to go. Use your discretion, but places where you have the opportunity to meet potential romantic partners and use the tools is wonderful. Hi, Max. Max says, I'm in a hardcore working phase at the moment. My reconnection attempts with this dismissive avoidant girl are not going so well. Yeah, that's okay. It's good that you're like giving yourself some space to focus on you at this time. And I'm planning to do a deep dive on my feelings and thoughts, to think of the future. I'm still really stuck on her. I don't see how I can be with anyone else. So I would really look into like, what are the things you're stuck on? Because those are going to be definitely parts of your golden shadow, like things to integrate within yourself, which will be really important. And yeah, it is okay to have feelings. It's nice to hear that. Aw, yeah. So Maria, hi Maria. Maria says, in my relationships, I really prefer to work on difficult things together. When hardship hits, I really don't want to be abandoned. That's when we need support the most. I agree. I'm finding I feel alone too. And space is one thing, but after a while, it's just something that doesn't work for me. So this is really important. Like if you guys are ever in a space where you have a partner and these are like deal breakers or non-negotiable needs or things that are really important to you, and people aren't showing up and not meeting them, and you keep trying and you keep wanting these things, it's also okay. And I don't know if you mean in like a romantic relationship right now specifically, but it's also okay for anybody at any point to go, oh my gosh, I'm showing up, I'm doing the work, I'm realizing really very much about what I want. And the person's not biting on the other end. They're not engaging. They're not showing up and doing this. And long term, this isn't going to fulfill me and this isn't going to be the right thing. And if that's the case, it's okay to choose to move in a different direction. It really is. But when we do that, after we've tried for a while, what I always see in people is that if we show up consistently over time and then nobody bites, eventually we do get to a point where it feels okay to walk away. It feels safe because we know, oh my gosh, I'm doing everything, and you can walk away a lot more regret-free. So I hope that that's okay. Yeah, I'm going to dive into some of the COVID stuff in just a moment because I see a couple of you mentioning feeling isolated. Honestly, please build relationships in here. Like I'm going to do whatever I can to support you guys as much as possible. Join the mastermind group, strike up conversations, use those worksheets. I'm not pressuring anybody either. Like I'm not at all trying to say like do these things, but like I'm just trying to think of how I can provide the most resources for people who are feeling isolated, because the reality is, like, is it a story that people are more isolated than usual? No, it's a pretty real thing, right? So what we have to do is come up with these creative strategies to get our needs met in other forms. And thank goodness we have the internet, and we have communities like this, and we have people online, and we have different things. And so the more you can sort of, even if it's outside of your comfort zone a little bit, once you like invest in doing that and just take that little leap of faith or that step to like build deeper relationships, or maybe get on phone calls, or, you know, in the mastermind group, if I know a lot of you guys joined this week, what we talk about the most is different, like there's a whole bunch of worksheets in there for what you can do, like topics of conversation, things you can focus on. And I think they're at the bottom of the mastermind group. I'll pin them to the top, but there's suggestions for like how to use a mastermind group, how to begin it. And I know a couple of you guys in there are already starting these conversations, which is amazing. And I also know that it feels outside of everybody's comfort zone a little bit, because it's like these people online, and, you know, it's different. But like, if you're doing that, you're going to be so thankful if you take this time of COVID-19 and you look back on it, and you, through the process, you built some really beautiful relationships. You had some deep conversations. You found other ways of getting your needs met. You use this time as like a retreat for yourself, and you extracted your unmet needs and went after them. Like, if you can intentionally create an approach that gives you like a vision of what you want to do and what you want to take from this time and how you want to pivot, and then you show up for it, you're going to look back and be like, oh, that was a hard time, but all these really beautiful things came out of it. But if we leave it on autopilot and we don't set intentions to get our needs met and take those little leaps of faith outside of our comfort zone, then it's just going to keep sucking and not being so great. So the more intentional you can be, the better. And like, yeah. And I think that that's going to be a really important piece. So you guys are just chatting. I just had an epiphany that on one hand, I'm amused at how my exes really did their best in relationships, but don't feel the same lightness or humor with my parents, who also did their best. Wow. And I think the missing link is that I truly believe it's nobody's fault that my romantic relationships didn't work out, but still feel like my parents blame me or themselves for things they couldn't control. Wow. So that might be a really great conversation to have on that note. I need to think of it. Hi, Efrat. I don't know if I saw you yet or said hi to you yet. Yeah, I agree, Ruby. So every time I asked a question that revolves around emotions, I was told I need to think of it. I see. I was lucky to get an answer within 3 weeks. So you were basically being told that like feeling communication doesn't work, which is really tough because it's important to hold space for both in a relationship, period. And yeah, Max, you were missed. We were wondering, and it's nice to see you here. Awesome says, okay, I think you guys are just chatting. I'm sorry if I'm missing any questions because I'm trying to just make sure I'm on top of the questions. Okay, so Akisha. Hi, Akisha. Hey, Thais, you said we need to give clear communication on our needs. How should we communicate or need them to present with us for quality time? Having a hard time explaining this need. Okay, great question. So around quality time, a great thing to do is it's a really good point. If you say to a dismissive avoidant, I want quality time, they're going to be like, what the heck does that mean? Like, they're not going to know where to go with that one. So it's really important to be able to say, oh, quality time to me means like sharing questions and having vulnerability. It doesn't mean like taking a walk or going hiking or rock climbing or whatever. It means like actually speaking and having deep conversations, or it means being playful and playing a board game or laughing. Or so get really clear on what that is and then create an activity to support it. So that's like the questions game and asking the deep questions for connection or whatever it is, get really clear about it and then communicate. The more you do that, the easier it's going to be. What does it mean for them to be, let's see. Okay, I'm going to answer just a couple more questions and then I'm going to let you guys go for the day. I think I'm missing spot on about what time is for FAs and DAs and about what meaning we attach to it. Yeah, awesome. I'm glad to hear that's helpful. Clarification. If the person turned up as FA, yeah, if they are FA or DA2 from the quiz, Kelly, and they have the same patterning, just recognize like two FAs together are probably going to polarize each other in different directions. So like either one of you is going to play more of the constantly anxious role and the other the dismissive, but it will change at times, or you're both pinballing all the time back and forth. Or if it's one person showed up as fearful and one person showed up as dismissive, the fact that the dismissive is willing to do the quiz, I think, is a great first sign. And then I think it's about how can we consistently use these tools to make sure that we have a lack of volatility in the relationship, a lot of clean communication and like clear-cut conversation around things, and we're honest and direct. Dismissive avoidance, the biggest needs that they have from fearful avoidance in the entirety of a relationship is clarity, consistency, stability, safety, validation, and I'm kind of saying clarity again, but like directness, like just knowing exactly what to expect, and then knowing that, getting some feedback that they're doing it right, or they're okay, or it's going well, sort of thing. Fearful avoidance, the biggest thing they need, quality time in terms of like depth of connection, trust. So, sometimes the inconsistent actions of the dismissive avoidant can trigger the trust wounds for the fearful avoidant. So trust can be built in that case with like more information. So the more it's like, oh, I pull away because I need time alone to recharge. I feel exhausted when I don't get enough alone time. The fearful avoidant will feel restful knowing these things really clearly. And then I would also say validation in a way, but more through actions than through words. The dismissive avoidant really needs a lot of validation through both, but specifically more words than actions. So they kind of like are inverse there. And once you source these things and like can be conscious about them and just talk about them like they're normal things, it makes the relationship dynamic so much easier to navigate. So I hope that that's helpful as well. Okay, I think Max says, hi Max. By the way, Thais, I'm reading a very interesting book on emotions these days. The concept of it is what you make it mean, your construct of the situation, signals is spot on. We make sense of noisy sensory input and process it even further to build a theory of what the outer world is. It's really rather like a matrix. Intense stuff. That sounds like an amazing book. Will you share that book? I like how it's presented differently. Like I like the dynamic that you just shared of like how we construct our reality from this information. I was supposed to go speed dating, but that was canceled. That's a great, like, honestly, it's a great place to practice, in my opinion. Like, talk to all these different people, see the different dynamics, see what comes up for you, triggers you. Like, not that you guys have to subject yourselves to these situations if they feel uncomfortable, but if you're willing to push your outside of the comfort zone and do the work, and I know, like, obviously everything's going to be canceled right now like that in most places around the world, but it's a great opportunity. One of the greatest things you can do if you're starting back into a relationship and dating and you're wondering sort of like where you're at is just track what comes up for you after a date. Instead of being like, oh, this date went well or didn't go well, and if it didn't go well, it means it was a failure and all these things. Instead, just look at like what came up for me when it didn't go well and why didn't it go well, and just use these things as like opportunities to just keep growing and learning and exploring yourself and seeing what comes up. And then the more you do that, the more you're preparing yourself so that when there is the right person or the right situation, you're really going to get the chance to thrive. I got in touch with my DAX trying to get closure. He just disappeared and deleted my number a year and a half ago. He was adamant he didn't remember that happened. Could that be possible? Possible, but unlikely, to be quite honest. Yeah. He didn't remember what happened. To me, to be quite honest, I mean, I'm not a mind reader, but to me that sounds like an avoidance strategy for conflict and the person feeling comfortable enough to come back around, but not really showing up in the best way in the situation, not showing up very maturely to own their part, I think, Anna. But it's great that you were able to do that and reach out, and I think that's wonderful. Attachment styles in the workplace series, Rachel and Shayna. Okay, I will definitely dive into that. Authority figures like employers and teachers, yeah, big time, because there's a direct relationship there. I'll definitely dive into some of that. One interesting thing that I've heard is that you're either in the friendship or romantic category for women, but I'm sure for men as well. So she withdraws because she sees relationships as unsafe or me as unsafe. Yeah, she might not see, like Max. I know Max a little bit and quite a bit, I hope. And Max is like one of the safest, most considerate people I've ever met. And so the fact that I don't think it's you're unsafe. I'm sure there was nothing you did that was unsafe, but it would be her stored associations that she puts you in a box under. So because she's made relationships unsafe, and then you're associated to the relationship, now her subconscious triggered association is the unsafety she feels in relationships being projected onto you and then associated together, and then there's a triggering event there. So I think that's probably a big piece of what's happening. So Awesome says, is there some content on CPTSD? I feel like I'm in a phase that is different from simply being anxious. If not available now, yeah. I'm going to be talking a lot about part of the how to get over a breakup is going to be about like clearing, which is a really important tool that you can apply to situations that are triggering PTSD or CPTSD. But I should do a separate course on that in the future. So I'll definitely dive into that, but I can definitely make some content in the meantime for videos. That's actually great. I'm trying to come up with like daily coronavirus type videos, not like about coronavirus, but about how to deal with a situation. I'm just writing this down because it's triggering a lot of things for a lot of people. So we'll definitely make some videos about that. Thank you for sharing that idea. Okay, so I was following Richard Grannon, but now I feel more stressed when watching his videos. I wonder why. I think I've seen one of his videos before. I think I liked him. But I might be getting him mixed up with somebody else. I'm curious to hear why. Okay, so last question that I see here is Nof. And Nof says, how do you know when your stories are just of your own making or if they are actually true? Great question. Great question. By holding them in the light and really looking. If something is triggering you, you owe it as a duty to yourself to really hold it in the light and be like, is this true? Is this really, really true? Could it be anything other than this? And to really assess it, because it's not until we do that that we can actually get to the true need underneath. So if I look at a story and I'm like, this person's being a jerk and they're trying to hurt me on purpose, can I really know that? It might feel like that, and that might feel really valid for me right now, but that feeling could be from this old association of somebody in my life who did act that way towards me, and it might be just triggering that. So I have to really look, and then if it's true, I know my need is to like not speak to that person again and set a firm boundary. And if it's not true, and maybe it's a colleague or somebody in the workplace that I'm going to be exposed to, then maybe my need is to just communicate differently to the person or to change my approach. You'll get to see the true need once you really hold it in the light and question it. So great question. You guys are absolutely wonderful. I am going to run. I know you guys are chatting a lot, which is so nice. I'm so glad you guys got a chance to like really connect in here and talk and share different things. I just saw one other question. I'm like scrolling through. The mastermind group, I can put a link to at the bottom here. I'll put the link. I see a couple of you guys asking that. And Shannon, why do we get so attached to certain difficult people? Often because there's something in our lives that's re-triggering. So like that, the traits about the difficult people, the traits are things that we're trying to work through in our past. So like if we felt dismissed by somebody in our childhood, and then somebody treats us like that again, often our brain is still out trying to resolve the problem, or it's a subconscious comfort zone for us, or we've carried limiting beliefs for a long period of time beneath the surface that says, that say, we don't deserve better, we don't deserve more. So we want to work on the beliefs. We want to work on changing our subconscious comfort zone by investing in our capacity to achieve different things in relationships and seeing it all the time and making new positive associations to receiving love. Because sometimes if we keep receiving the old things, it's because we're not willing to receive the new, better things. We cut them off somehow. Or because it's a problem we're trying to resolve. And usually that means there's something we have to resolve within ourselves around that same problem. Like if I'm still attracted to somebody who dismisses me, I'm probably dismissing myself somewhere. And so it feels like a match. Okay. So those are the sort of key qualities in there. I hope that that's helpful. I'm going to put a link right now in the chat here. I also pinned it to the top of the Facebook group. So those of you who are in the Facebook group, you can check in there as well. Yeah, and don't worry at all. It's totally okay to ask. If you guys have to ask a few more times and check in, then that's perfect. So pin to the top of the Facebook group if you lose it from here. I just posted again in the chat right there. And then it's in an old email. So if you like control search your past emails and you search like mastermind group, it'll probably come up from the school, like personal development school mastermind group, but you should be able to find it between those 3 places. And if not, you can totally ask again next webinar and we'll go from there. Info when we schedule, would it make sense to put out an email with the mastermind info when we schedule the call, or too many people? When we say, yeah, absolutely. We'll include it. I think you're saying include it in the mastermind group. Yes. I have so many notes from today. I'm going to make a note of that. CPTSD and add in the webinar, the mastermind group. I will communicate this to my team and I will make a video on CPTSD. Thank you guys so much. Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for being here. Thank you, Claire. Hi. Thank you all for showing up and sharing and for being a wonderful part of the community. And I was thinking too, it was actually a recommendation. Bye, Natalie. It's a recommendation from somebody who said, can I leave the chat alive after? Bye, Tony. And I'm not sure how to do that, but I'm going to ask somebody on my tech team this week. So if you guys ever want to stay here and just chat afterwards or something like that, I'm going to see if I can leave this up somehow, if that's of interest. So let me know too. Okay. Thank you guys so much. Have an amazing rest of your Saturday. See you guys soon. Bye. Thank you. Yeah, that's so sweet, Kelly. Bye, guys.